and bring in a legal expert, Ulrich Roux, joining us in studio to talk about the resumption of proceedings and what we've heard so far. And Ulrich, one of the things that stood out for me from Agrizzi's evidence today is how at some point he was asked about an irregularity to do with the salary where a fraction of it was paid into his wife's account. Now, if you know anything about HR processes, that would never be the norm as per the law. But again, a small but stark reminder of just how brazen people were in this sort of illegal behavior.
No, exactly. Good afternoon. You know, Mr. Agrizzi was a high-ranking official with Bosasa, and the fact that his salary, half of it was paid into his wife's bank account, I think falls nothing short of tax evasion. So regardless of the HR processes, the only other reason why a person would reduce the salary paid into his account is in an attempt to avoid having to pay X amount in PAYE tax earnings. So certainly explosive evidence coming out here this morning. But to add on to the point that you made, this is the first testimony and the first enterprise that we have, Bosasa, where the Guptas seem not to have had any links or influence in that state enterprise. But we'll have to wait and see what other evidence comes out.
But legally, what does it mean for Agrizzi's evidence that he himself is so compromised? I mean, yet he's expected to implicate a lot of high-ranking politicians, some people, or a former head of the National Prosecuting Authority, is what we're reading, is among those who's going to implicate. But the fact that he himself is so implicated will surely raise doubt at some point about the credibility of his evidence.
Yes, definitely. And remember that the purpose of this state capture inquiry is one can equate it to a fact-finding mission, for all of this evidence to be brought to light, and then subsequent to the finalization of this inquiry, the NPA and the South African Police Services will of course then have to make a decision whether the evidence presented during this inquiry will hold up in a court of law, whether any allegations or charges can be brought subsequent to this inquiry by making use of this evidence, and whether the state will be able to prove a case beyond reasonable doubt. Now, testimony by Agrizzi, where he implicates himself as well as other officials, we can equate to what we call a Section 204 witness. And a Section 204 witness is a person who turns state witness, and he testifies on behalf of the state. And if his testimony is found to be honest and an accurate description of what happened, he then receives immunity from further prosecution. He could enter into an agreement with the state whereby he receives a lesser sentence in exchange for this testimony to be delivered against the implicated people. So one could expect a possible scenario of that sort after this inquiry, but one would have to wait and see whether the state think at all, whether they have enough grounds to charge anyone subsequent to this inquiry. And I think we need to remind all the viewers that the Hawks and the NPA have come out and they've said that, listen here, we need to wait for the completion of this inquiry before we can level any charges against any person related to state capture. And unfortunately, you know, for the entire South Africa and the entire community looking at this inquiry, all we've wanted is to see results and to see people being arrested and to see people being brought to book. But we're going to wait quite some time for the conclusion of this inquiry and then for the state to evaluate that evidence and determine whether they will be charging it.
And you're right, it's a long road ahead for the state capture inquiry. We were expecting Duduzane Zuma to cross-examine the likes of the former Deputy Finance Minister Mcebisi Jonas and the former ANC MP Fakey Mentor, who've implicated him in their evidence. But it'll be very important, I suppose, to watch Fakey Mentor under cross-examination by Duduzane Zuma or his legal counsel, because we know her evidence has so far been rather questionable. The last development was her saying to the Zondo Commission, I'm so sorry, I made a mistake as far as implicating Fana Hlongwane. She says she named the wrong man in her evidence. So what level of preparation then goes into getting Fakey Mentor ready to reappear at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, if indeed her evidence is going to be taken into account as a very serious part of the sort of malfeasance that she described?
No, definitely. It's that old cliche of when you point a finger at someone, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. But having said that, remember that her testimony pertaining to individuals implicated in state capture would be limited to that. So if the cross-examination of Duduzane Zuma's legal team delves into her credibility and her character pertaining to other issues, one could expect Judge Zondo to put a stop to that and to limit the questioning and the cross-examination of Faiki Mentor to purely the issues at hand pertaining to state capture. But that is always the risk when one leads evidence, is that a witness could be cross-examined. And the purpose of cross-examination is to test the accuracy and the honesty of that witness, and to determine whether they are recollecting facts accurately and as they indeed happened, or whether they are in fact being dishonest. So, you know, that is a decision which if the state at all decide to charge anyone at the end of this inquiry, will have to make, whether these witnesses will contribute towards their case, or whether it will in fact create doubt about the individuals who are implicated in the so-called state capture.
Ulrich Roux will be relying on you quite a lot as we continue to cover the very latest out of the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. Ulrich Roux, legal expert, making sense of what we've heard so far on day 1 of the resumption of the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. The news continues on ENCA in a moment. Stay with us.